The conference room on the fourth floor of Piedmont Regional Bank's headquarters held 7 people in absolute silence. Autumn light fell through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a mahogany table covered with documents that would end careers and possibly send men to prison. At one end sat a woman named Catherine Whitmore, regional director, her face drained of color 12 minutes into a presentation she had not anticipated. Across from her, a man in an expensive charcoal suit had begun to sweat through his shirt despite the room's careful climate control. His name was Marcus Webb, and the ground beneath his carefully constructed life was crumbling, but it was the man at the far end who commanded the room without speaking. 68 years old. Close-cropped gray hair gone silver at the temples. Hands folded with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that truth required no volume. He wore a navy blue suit, 11 years old but pressed sharp, the same suit he had worn to his daughter's wedding. His name was Harold Benson, and in the next 45 minutes, he would dismantle everything Marcus Webb had built. To understand how Harold came to sit at that table, we must go back 3 months, to a summer morning when the most pressing concern on his mind was whether his tomatoes would survive the August heat. Harold Benson woke at 5:47 every morning, 3 minutes before his alarm, a habit carved into his body across 4 decades. His late wife Mildred used to reach for his arm in the darkness, her voice soft with sleep. Your body knows time better than any clock, Harry. She had been gone 2 years and 3 months now. Pancreatic cancer, swift and without mercy. Some mornings Harold still reached for her side of the bed before memory caught up with instinct. He rose, pressed his palms together, and offered thanks for another day granted. The house on Fayetteville Street, a modest brick ranch purchased in 1987 for $62,000, held 40 years of living in its walls. The kitchen where Mildred had passed down her sweet potato pie recipe to their daughter Denise. The back porch where Harold had taught his grandson Deshaun to identify cardinals and blue jays by their songs alone. Every room carried weight, carried history, carried the particular architecture of a life built slowly and with intention. Breakfast followed the same pattern it had for decades. 2 eggs over easy, 1 slice of whole wheat toast with butter spread thin, coffee black without sugar. Mildred had worried about his cholesterol toward the end, but Dr. Patterson had cleared him, so Harold allowed himself this daily ritual of constancy. He ate facing the photographs on the kitchen wall. Denise at her graduation from North Carolina Central, the first in their family to earn a degree. Deshaun at 16 in his Riverside High basketball jersey, all limbs and promise. And in the center, the photograph from their 45th anniversary, taken outside Mount Zion Baptist Church 8 months before Mildred passed. She was looking at him in that picture with an expression he could not name but recognized as the accumulated weight of a lifetime's love. "Morning, Millie," he said to the photograph. "Might rain later. I'll check on the garden before it does." He washed his single plate, his single fork, his single cup, dried each one, returned them to their places. These small repetitions kept him tethered to the world. His phone buzzed at 7:15. A message from Deshaun. "Morning, Grandpa. Still coming to my game Friday?" Harold typed back slowly, his fingers too large for the small keyboard. "Wouldn't miss it for anything. Love you." 3 heart emojis returned. Harold did not understand all the symbols young people used, but hearts meant love, and love needed no translation. By 8 o'clock, he stood among his tomato plants, a 20 by 15 plot that had been his project for 30 years. The August heat pressed down, but the vines were holding. Harold moved through the rows with the patience of a man who understood that growth could not be rushed. This was meditative work. It asked only presence. His neighbor, Dorothy Patterson, called over the fence. 74 years old, retired after running an elementary school for 22 years, widowed herself for 5 years now. "Morning, Harold. Those tomatoes coming along?" "Doing their best, Dorothy. How's that hip treating you?" "It complains, but I don't let it win." She paused, leaning heavier on her cane than usual. "You going to the bank today?" "Planning on it. Some paperwork needs sorting." Something shifted in Dorothy's expression, a guardedness entering her eyes that Harold had not seen before. "You be careful down there. Something's not right with that place lately." Harold straightened, giving her his full attention. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly. My statement last month had charges I've never seen before. Service fees, they called them. But I've had that account 19 years, Harold. 19 years and never saw fees like that." Her voice dropped. $347. Just gone. "Did you ask them about it?" "I tried." Dorothy's laugh held no humor. "That young man in the fancy suits, he talked to me like I was confused. Kept using words I didn't understand. Said it was all in the disclosures I signed." She shook her head slowly. "Maybe I am getting confused. Maybe I just don't understand how banking works these days." Harold felt something tighten in his chest. "Dorothy, you managed 600 children for 22 years. You're not confused about anything." She gave him a tired smile, the smile of someone who had stopped expecting the world to treat her fairly. "You're kind, Harold, but sometimes I wonder if the world just moved past folks like us. Everything's computers now. Everything's automatic. Maybe we just don't belong anymore." Harold did not respond immediately. He stood among his tomato plants, turning her words over in his mind. He had known Dorothy Patterson for decades. She was sharp, capable, the kind of woman who commanded respect in any room she entered. For her to doubt herself like this, to accept mistreatment as inevitable, to believe the lie that age had made her incompetent. "I'll see what I can find out," he said finally, "when I go in today." Dorothy nodded, but her eyes held little hope. "Don't trouble yourself on my account. It's probably nothing. Probably just me not keeping up." She turned and walked back toward her house, moving slower than Harold remembered. He watched her go, and something settled in his gut, cold and certain. He had seen this before, decades ago, in another life, in investigations that had shown him exactly how predators operated. They targeted the vulnerable. They created confusion. They made their victims doubt themselves. The tomatoes could wait. Harold went inside to change into clothes suitable for the bank. As he buttoned his shirt, he caught his reflection in the bedroom mirror. 68 years old. Gray hair, lined face. The world looked at men like him and saw someone to be managed, dismissed, perhaps pitied. They saw a retired postal worker, a church deacon, a grandfather who probably needed help understanding his own accounts. They did not see the 8 years he had spent as a Criminal Investigation Command Special Agent in the United States Army. They did not see the fraud cases he had built, the colonels and contractors he had brought down, the commendations sitting in a box in his closet. They did not see the man who had learned across a lifetime of service that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous. Harold Benson looked at his reflection and understood something with perfect clarity. Whatever was happening at that bank, whoever was behind it, they had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had mistaken his gentleness for weakness. They had mistaken his patience for ignorance, and they had no idea what was coming. Piedmont Regional Bank's Fayetteville Street branch occupied a handsome brick building that had served the community for 43 years. Harold remembered when Mr. Samuel Crawford had managed the branch, a black man who knew every customer by name and treated each account, whether it held $50 or $50,000, with equal respect. Crawford had retired in 2008, and since then, the branch had cycled through managers Harold barely recognized. The building remained the same, but something essential had shifted in the atmosphere, a coolness that had crept in where warmth once lived. The current manager was Patricia Donovan, mid-40s, pleasant but perpetually rushed, the kind of administrator who viewed customers as problems to be processed rather than people to be served. Harold had dealt with her occasionally, but for the past year, his primary contact had been the financial advisor, a man named Marcus Webb. Webb had arrived 18 months ago, recruited from a larger institution in Raleigh with promises of expanding the branch's wealth management services. He was 42 years old, polished in his presentation, articulate in ways that created distance rather than connection. Harold had observed during their first meeting how Webb spoke to elderly customers. The careful condescension, the elaborate explanations of simple concepts, the way he positioned himself as the solution to confusion he himself manufactured. Harold entered the bank at 9:30. The lobby held a dozen customers, almost all of them elderly, almost all of them black. This had been a historically black neighborhood for generations, and these were people who had banked here across decades, who trusted institutions because trust was what their upbringing had taught them. Harold watched them now with different eyes. How many of them had noticed strange charges? How many had questioned, only to be talked in circles until they doubted their own minds? He took a number and waited. When his turn came, the teller directed him not to the regular window but to Marcus Webb's office along the side wall. Webb stood as Harold approached, extending his hand with a smile that showed teeth but not warmth. "Mr. Benson, good to see you. Please have a seat. What can I do for you today?" Harold settled into the chair across from Webb's desk, taking his time, observing the space, framed credentials on the wall. A photograph of Webb shaking hands with someone important at a corporate event. A desktop organized with aggressive precision. Everything about the office projected competence and authority, designed to make visitors feel they were in capable hands. "I have questions about my account statements." Harold kept his voice mild, unhurried. "Some charges I'd like to understand better." Webb's smile remained fixed. "Of course. Let me pull up your accounts." His fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, and he turned his monitor slightly so Harold could see it, a gesture meant to signal transparency that somehow achieved the opposite. "Now, what specifically caught your attention?" Harold removed a small notebook from his shirt pocket. He had written down every charge that troubled him, organized by date and amount. Each entry in the careful handwriting he had developed across a lifetime of record keeping. August 3rd, advisory service fee, $85. I didn't request any advisory services. Webb nodded with practiced sympathy. "That's actually standard for accounts in your bracket, Mr. Benson. It's disclosed in the account agreement you signed when we updated your accounts last year. The fee covers portfolio monitoring, market analysis, personalized recommendations tailored to your financial situation. I have a savings account and a checking account." Harold let the statement hang in the air. "What portfolio are you monitoring?" A flicker behind Webb's eyes. There and gone. "Well, We monitor market conditions that could affect savings rates, interest calculations, economic factors that might impact your holdings. It's quite routine. And this one. Harold turned a page in his notebook. July 19th. Document processing fee, $42. What document was processed? That covers quarterly statement generation and archival. With current regulations, there's significant paperwork involved in maintaining accounts. The fee helps offset administrative costs. I receive paper statements mailed to my house. Always have. Is there processing beyond that? Back-end processing, Mr. Benson. Compliance work, security protocols, regulatory requirements. It's complex. Webb leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a gentle tone that Harold recognized immediately, the tone used for children and the elderly, for anyone deemed incapable of understanding adult matters. I know these fees can be confusing. Banking has changed dramatically in recent years. Would you like me to schedule a meeting where I can walk you through everything in detail? I could prepare visual aids, simplify the concepts. Harold studied the man across the desk. 42 years old, well-fed, confident in his position and his ability to manage difficult customers. Webb saw an elderly black man in a modest shirt, someone who had likely worked manual labor his whole life, someone who could be redirected with enough jargon and patience. That won't be necessary. Harold closed his notebook. I believe I understand well enough. Relief softened Webb's features. Wonderful. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Actually, yes. I'd like copies of the disclosure documents I signed last year, the ones explaining these fees. The relief vanished. Something harder took its place, though Webb covered it quickly. Of course, I can request those from our records department. It may take a few days to locate the specific documents. I'll wait for your call. Harold rose, extending his hand. Webb shook it briefly, his grip firm but dismissive. Always a pleasure, Mr. Benson. Take care now. Walking out of the bank, Harold paused on the sidewalk. The summer heat pressed against him, but his attention was elsewhere, cataloging details, noting inconsistencies. The fees Webb had described made no sense for simple savings and checking accounts. The explanations were circular, designed to exhaust rather than inform. And Webb's reaction to the document request, that brief hardening of expression, told Harold everything he needed to know about what those documents would reveal. He thought about Dorothy, $347 in a single month. He thought about James and Ethel Washington from church, who had mentioned concerns about their accounts during a fellowship dinner last month. He thought about Claudette Williams, whose husband had passed last year, leaving her to navigate finances she had never managed alone. How many others were there? How much money had been taken from people who trusted this institution with their life savings? Harold walked to his car slowly, deliberately, a man with no particular urgency. Anyone watching would see exactly what Marcus Webb had seen. An elderly customer, perhaps a bit confused, certainly not a threat to anyone or anything. But Harold's mind was already working, already building the framework of an investigation. He would need documentation. He would need patterns. He would need other victims willing to share their records and their stories. And he would need to be careful. Men like Webb did not operate alone. Someone above him was either complicit or willfully blind, and institutional power protected its own with fierce loyalty. If Harold moved too quickly, asked the wrong questions to the wrong people, the evidence would disappear and the doors would close. He had learned this lesson decades ago, in cases where patience meant the difference between justice and failure, Rushing had destroyed more investigations than any other single factor. The predator had to believe he was safe. The trap had to be built in silence. Harold drove home through streets he had known for 40 years, past the barber shop where he had taken Deshawn for his first haircut, past the corner store where Mildred used to buy lottery tickets every Friday, never winning more than $10, but never stopping either. Past Mount Zion Baptist, where he had been married, where he had been baptized, where Mildred's funeral had filled every pew. This was his community. These were his people. And someone was stealing from them, one manufactured fee at a time, counting on their trust and their age and their reluctance to make trouble. Harold pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel. Mildred's voice came to him, clear as the day she had spoken the words during a difficult time years ago. God doesn't give us burdens without also giving us the strength to carry them, Harry. The question is whether we're willing to pick them up. He had picked up burdens before. He would pick up this one now. Inside the house, Harold went to the closet in the spare bedroom and retrieved a box he had not opened in years. Inside were documents, commendations, photographs from another life. He did not need them yet, but he needed to know they were there, needed to remember who he had been and what he was capable of. The investigation had begun. The weeks that followed moved with the deliberate pace of a man who understood that justice required architecture before action. Harold gathered documentation from 6 households initially: Dorothy, the Washingtons, Robert Simmons, Claudette Williams, and his own accounts, including those Mildred had managed during her final year. He spread the statements across his dining room table and traced patterns that emerged like constellations from scattered stars. The fees had begun small, almost invisible, $8 here, $12 there. But they had grown steadily, and they had grown in ways that suggested calculation rather than coincidence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a young woman named Tamika Johnson, 25 years old, who processed accounts in the bank's back office. Her grandmother attended Mount Zion, had mentioned Harold's questions during a Sunday dinner. Tamika approached him outside the bank one afternoon, nervous but resolute, and pressed an envelope into his hands. Inside were account records showing manual fee overrides that bypassed standard approval workflows. Every override carried the same employee identification number, Marcus Webb's. Harold filed complaints with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He contacted a lawyer named Angela Crawford, granddaughter of the man who had once managed the Fayetteville Street branch with integrity. He reached out to a former Army colleague now working financial crimes for the FBI, seeking advice on evidence presentation, and he requested a meeting with Piedmont Regional Bank's board of directors, citing irregularities that exposed the institution to significant regulatory liability. That final communication opened doors that had been designed to remain closed. Now, 3 months after that summer morning among his tomatoes, Harold sat in the 4th-floor conference room while Catherine Whitmore reviewed an agenda she had not anticipated. Representatives from the OCC and CFPB flanked him, their presence lending federal weight to what might otherwise have been dismissed as a customer complaint. Angela Crawford sat to his left, prepared for whatever resistance the institution might offer. Across the table, Marcus Webb had stopped fidgeting. His face held the frozen expression of a man watching his future collapse in real time. Harold opened his folder and began placing documents on the mahogany surface one by one. Fee pattern analysis across 6 customer accounts, 18 months. Total unexplained charges, $43,216.71. Forged authorization signatures, 7 of them, confirmed by a forensic document specialist. Internal processing records showing manual overrides, everyone bearing Webb's employee identification. And finally, a pattern analysis extending beyond the initial 6 households, drawing on complaint records and interviews with 37 additional community members. Estimated total fraudulent fees across 3 years, $312,000. The room had gone silent. Catherine Whitmore's hands trembled slightly as she turned pages. Webb stared at Harold with an expression that had shifted from terror to something closer to disbelief. "Who are you?" The words came out barely above a whisper. Harold met his gaze without blinking. "I'm Harold Benson. I carried mail for the United States Postal Service for 34 years. Before that, I spent 8 years as a special agent with the Army Criminal Investigation Command. I investigated fraud, theft, and financial crimes targeting soldiers and their families." He paused, letting the silence build. "I was good at it." Webb's face drained of remaining color. The man who had spoken to Harold like a confused grandfather, who had manufactured complexity to justify theft, who had counted on age and race and institutional power to protect him. That man understood now what he had failed to see from the beginning. Harold placed one final document on the table. "This is a summary of findings I've submitted to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, the OCC, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They have expressed significant interest in pursuing a formal investigation." Angela Crawford spoke into the stillness. "My client is prepared to discuss resolution options prioritizing restitution for affected customers. We are also prepared to recommend additional regulatory penalties if the bank fails to cooperate fully." Whitmore found her voice, attempting to distance the institution from its employee. Mr. Webb's actions, if proven, were not sanctioned by... "With respect," Harold interrupted gently, "you will want to be careful about what you claim was not sanctioned. I have documentation of complaints filed with branch management over the past 2 years, all dismissed without investigation. I have records showing Mr. Webb's fee-generated revenue highlighted in quarterly performance reviews as a success story." His voice remained calm, almost kind, which made the words land harder. Whether anyone at this table knew specifics, the institution created conditions that allowed this to happen and profited from it. Webb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this. This is ridiculous. He's just a what, Mr. Webb?" Harold's eyes held steady. "An old man? Someone who wouldn't notice? Someone who wouldn't understand? Someone who wouldn't matter?" Webb had no answer. He stood frozen, exposed, the architecture of his contempt laid bare. "Sit down, Marcus." Whitmore's voice was quiet, defeated. Then to Harold, "What do you want?" "Full restitution for every affected customer, with interest. Termination and prosecution for everyone involved. Institutional reforms, better oversight, clearer disclosures, independent monitoring, and a formal apology to the community this branch was supposed to serve." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried weight that filled the room. "My wife was one of your customers. Mildred Benson. She banked here during the last year of her life while she was fighting cancer, while she was exhausted and frightened and trying to keep our affairs in order. You took $12,847 from a dying woman who trusted you." Harold's voice did not rise. It did not need to. That is not something I can forgive, but it is something I will make certain you answer for." The aftermath unfolded across months. Webb was arrested on 43 counts of bank fraud, forgery, and elder financial abuse. His trial resulted in conviction on all counts. The judge, noting the vulnerability of victims and the breach of trust involved, sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. Piedmont Regional Bank agreed to $2.4 million in restitution and a $3.1 million regulatory fine. 312 families received checks in the mail. Harold donated his entire restitution payment to Mount Zion's Emergency Assistance Fund. Mildred would have wanted it that way. 1 year later, on a warm Saturday in May, Riverside High School's gymnasium overflowed with families gathered for graduation. Harold sat in the third row wearing his navy blue suit, Denise beside him clutching flowers, tears already streaming down her face. When Deshaun's name was called, Deshaun Michael Porter, graduating with honors, recipient of the Harold and Mildred Benson Community Leadership Scholarship, Harold felt his heart expand until it threatened to burst. Deshaun walked across the stage, accepted his diploma, and looked directly at his grandfather with a smile that held generations of love within it. That evening, after the celebration had quieted, Harold stood alone in his backyard garden. The tomatoes were thriving, red and heavy on the vine. He picked one, still warm from the day's sun, and bit into it. Dorothy called over the fence, "Those look wonderful, Harold." "Best crop in years. You coming to the cookout tomorrow?" "Wouldn't miss it." She smiled and disappeared inside, and Harold stood in the gathering dusk, fireflies beginning to glow among the plants. He thought about Mildred, about Denise and Deshaun, about the neighbors who had trusted him when he asked them to, about the truth that had carried him through 8 years of military service, 34 years walking mail routes, nearly 50 years of marriage, and one final investigation that had made things right. Dignity was not something anyone could take. It could only be surrendered. And as long as a man remembered who he was, he could face anything the world decided to throw at him. Harold looked up at the evening star appearing in the darkening sky. "Good night, Millie. We did all right." He went inside, made himself tea, and sat down with his Bible at peace.